the Dialed In Podcast. I'm Mo, and as always, I'm here with my horological bestie, Gene. Gene, how you doing, buddy?
Doing great.
What do you got on the wrist today?
Today, I thought I'd bring in a vintage piece.
Love it.
So on the wrist, got a Gallet Multichron from the 60s.
Dude, we got to talk more about Gallet on this episode.
Yeah.
I don't think I know enough about them, but the watch is awesome.
Yeah, silver dial. It's in really nice condition and something that I picked up a few years back and don't necessarily wear as often as I should. But thinking about what we were discussing today just felt like the right time, and I'm gonna wear it more often.
I love it. I actually, this is my first time seeing it, and it's an insane condition for being from the 60s, you said?
Yeah, from the 60s.
Yeah, sick watch. It's a chronograph, right?
It is.
Does it work? Does the
It
chronograph?
works.
Okay.
It doesn't keep the best time in the world, so it's actually probably overdue for a service. But
Do you think, okay, so on the last episode, I know we haven't done my wrist check yet, but you know me. On the last episode, you mentioned that Breitling had acquired Gallet.
yeah.
Do you think that means that now you can give this watch to Breitling to service?
It's a really good question. Maybe there's a point in the future where I will be able to do that. I don't know that now is the right time for that. At this stage, I think I've probably just got to take it to a watchmaker that has some experience with vintage movements and
Particularly chronographs. You know,
yeah.
that's a tough service sometimes.
Yeah,
So-
yeah. I mean, people don't realize that a chronograph is actually a very complicated movement.
Dude,
I think we take
totally.
it for granted just given, that it's relatively common these days
Yep.
in a bunch of different watches. But inside, under the hood, it's actually a very complicated movement.
And expensive to service.
Yeah.
So, I guess follow up with us and tell us when you eventually...
Great.
Yeah.
What about you?
Great minds think alike. I'm also wearing vintage today. I'm wearing a 1979 Datejust that I actually talked about on the last episode. Royal blue dial. It's two tones, so it's a gold fluted bezel steel case with a nice little inscription saying "Go for it" on the back.
Love the inscription. And by the way, the color contrast between royal blue and yellow gold. I mean, that's actually one of my favorite kind of combinations. It's stunning contrast.
Before seeing this watch, that was one of your favorite
Yeah.
combinations.
Yeah.
I can't even think of another. Maybe so. That's why I was so drawn to this because I don't really see that so often. So now that you've said that, I'm trying to think of another watch that maybe is modern that uses that color combo. Can you think of one?
Not off the top of my head, but just
Yeah.
again, blue, particularly royal blue and gold is just whenever I do see it, typically with vintage.
Totally.
It pops up occasionally. Nothing's coming to mind immediately, but it's a great color combo.
But that's exactly the point I'm making. Is I think it's more common vintage, and it's weird that neither of us can, at the top of our heads at least, think of a modern watch that has that combo. Well, great segue into the episode, by the way, because, ladies and gentlemen, you are going to hear about vintage watches from two people that don't know much about vintage watches. With that, as always, there's no barrier to entry here on the Dialed In Pod, just a love for watches. And so with that, Gene, let's get dialed in.
Let's do it.
Let's talk about vintage watches.
Yeah.
So on the last episode, we were going through some new acquisitions we made. And interestingly, like through your Cartier piano dial tank and through my vintage 1979 Datejust, vintage and neo-vintage as recent purchases, not having discussed that beforehand, the two of us, that's kind of interesting. We should talk about like what drove that purchasing decision.
Mm-hmm.
Is this sort of where we are? Is this a natural evolution in like a collector's journey? Like you kind of, everyone says you start with Rolex and end with Rolex. There's always a period in between where you're like F Rolex. I don't want to look at a sub ever again.
Right.
Are we at that point where you're like, okay, we've done modern watches, we lust after them, we buy them, and now it's like only vintage? Or are you mixing in modern vintage? So tell me a little bit about your experience with vintage.
I mean, I think my future will probably be some kind of mix between new and vintage / neo vintage, mostly because I think if you consider your watch journey and the trajectory that is typical of most people that get into watches, you will generally do a deep dive at some point, begin to learn more. I mean, it's kind of like my experience with music. And if I think about how I got into hip hop, like you will generally listen to, to hip hop. And I came up in sort of the late 90s, early 2000s. And what ends up happening is you listen to it, you enjoy it, you love it. And then with hip hop, you start learning about samples.
Mm-hmm.
And then the samples will generally drive you to some of the history, and you start getting into like 60s, like jazz records and things like that. And I think watches are somewhat similar, right? Like you learn about Rolex and you learn about the Submariner, and then that will inevitably take your journey to, you know, where the Submariner came from and what was the original version of that watch and how it's evolved over time. And I think as you begin to learn a bit more about that and sort of identify, you know, that evolution and that history, you will kind of call back to it and start to, you know, identify those particular pieces that are meaningful to you. And that's kind of what happened with me. And so, you know, I think about some of the neo vintage pieces I have, like the GMT, the 16570.
The Explorer.
The
too.
Explorer. Oh, sorry, the Explorer. Sorry, not GMT.
It
does
is
have
a
a GMT,
GMT
function,
yeah,
but yeah, like that watch is an example of that, right? Like,
and you have the white dial, right?
I do have the Polar, and it's got a nice, you know, kind of creamy indices, which people gravitate towards. But I mean, that's kind of the thing, you know. There's an entry, and then as you get deeper into it, you kind of learn a bit more about the history and that sort of thing. So I think that's my journey. I think it will continue to be my journey on both sides of that. You know, again, new, and then you know, vintage and neo vintage, and yeah.
It's okay. So I gotta. It's hard to talk about vintage watches without focusing so much on Rolex. So I promise we won't spend the whole episode on Rolex. But you just brought up the neo vintage Explorer 2. That watch is so great and well priced, and like good condition, bad condition versions. Like I actually don't even care. They're just cool watches. They're perfect size. They're great GMT functionality. They're not the sort of maxi cases or super cases that, you know, modern Rolex is now. And so what I'm getting at, let's talk about modern Rolex versus vintage Rolex a little bit. When I say vintage, you can interpret that however you want. We can talk about the, you know, 1940s, or we could certainly talk about the 1990s and call it neo vintage, right? The Explorer 2 is like the worst selling Rolex right now in the modern collection, right? I either they do have to like get rid of it or totally change it up. Like that is not a desired watch. Yet, I think the 90s versions, right? The 40 millimeter versions, particularly the Polar ones, do really well on the secondary. You know, they're constantly traded in and out of. And to your point, like part of it is that creamy patina on the indices.
Yeah.
When you really break it down, is a flaw.
Correct.
All beauty, charm, and interesting things that people talk about in vintage watches tend to be flaws and imperfections. Yeah. And so what I'm getting at, and kind of teasing out my own thought here a little bit, is Rolex is mass luxury these days, right? It's mass produced luxury. They make over 1 million watches a year. They're going to hit 2 million watches a year soon with their, you know, new factories are opening and stuff. Yet they do a great. I'm not saying anything bad about modern Rolex and how they market and like their false scarcity. Like they're doing great. Like no one's concerned for Rolex right now. But you know, they still make bangers of watches, make them exclusive, and people lust after them, and it's the most searched watch term on Google and all that stuff. However, when you put on a modern Rolex and you look at even two of the same model side by side, they're exactly the same, right?
They're
That's
identical.
mass produced, right? Yeah. That they lack a little bit of emotion or feeling towards it. So like you put it on and even after you get the watch you've been waiting for, like the Panda Daytona, which is a great watch. Like that's and that's actually one of the watches that in the modern collection that have kind of kept some of its old school charm, if you will. However, comparing that to when I put on a 6265 from the 80s, I want to say the 80s, totally different feeling. Yeah. You know, it's not perfect. It's certainly not perfect. And I'm going to quote John Legend here, but like, you know, I think it's one of the best lyrics of all time. The perfect imperfections. Is something about modern Rolex doesn't have that emotional draw to it. That vintage, the charm behind it, the beauty, the story, maybe also like, you know, when you're buying vintage, you kind of dream up what the scenario in which someone bought it knew and the life they lived. And I just feel like you don't get any of that.
Yeah.
You're just putting a hunk of steel on your wrist.
Yeah, I mean, here's the truth. Modern Rolexes, and to your point about a lot of the character with vintage and neo vintage is really about some of the flaws. Modern Rolexes are designed and the technology has been built so that the Panda Daytona that you buy today will look the same as the day you bought it, to the extent you take care of it 10, 20, 30 years from now.
True.
And what makes shopping for vintage really interesting for me and a totally unique experience is that every single example of something vintage or neo vintage that you see will be slightly different than anything else. And so we could in fact have the same exact, vintage watch from the same year, and the way that they have patinaed over time will be specific to, the example that we have. And so if you think about the idea of watch collecting about, being about something unique, one of one, I mean, that's kind of what you get with vintage. Nothing will be exactly the same as the example that you have. So from that perspective, I think that's what makes shopping for vintage and neo vintage really exciting, is that there's a journey to find the example that you got, and there's something totally specific about the one that you ultimately get, which is awesome.
Perfectly said. What's even weirder, and people who aren't into watches would find this crazy. Like, what spider dials?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, that's a dial that's cracked.
It's cracked.
Like,
Yeah.
that's all that's
Yeah,
happened. Like,
yeah.
it was not a well-made dial.
It's actually shattered.
Yes.
Yeah.
And people, including me, to be honest, maybe I'm just buying into the BS that
Yeah.
we're told, but like that, there's beauty in that.
Yeah.
I
love that they find terms to make it sound better. Like,
Yes.
it's a spider dial, not a cracked dial.
Totally.
Or it's tropical instead of it, turning brown.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're exactly right.
But isn't there something beautiful about tropical dials?
Absolutely.
I've been obsessing over first series Royal Oaks 5402s.
Many of which have turned tropical.
Yes.
Yeah.
Something about that, like okay, let's talk about Royal Oak for a second, right? 1972 was a crazy proposition. It was an insanely priced, high-priced steel, sort of industrial-looking watch. And the way they advertise, I actually posted on our Instagram a story the other day of an ad from 1972 of the Royal Oak, and they advertised it as being a incredibly expensive steel watch. Like, it was a big, just like FU money move, right? Like, yeah, it's steel and we're charging this much money. Yeah. You need this, Something about that made to perfection, but still looking industrial, and sort of how it's aged over time to actually just like totally kind of disintegrate the dial a little bit. Like, something about that juxtaposition is amazing to me. And I will never buy one. I'm going to be honest right now. Like, I will never buy one because they're just going to be too expensive. And I don't know. I'm very happy with a modern Royal Oak. It's fine. I love the history of it. I don't need the first series, but to look at it, if someone had it on their wrist, I would probably stare at that thing for an hour. Yeah. Like, it's a beautiful watch. And that's kind of what we're getting at with vintage today. There's a lot to look at, to learn about. You mentioned history. So many iterations, less pieces were made back then of any brand we're talking about. And I also really like the idea, and I'm going to keep coming back to this today, of sort of thinking about where someone was in life when they bought it new, how they treated it, what they did with it, why they bought it, and how it ended up in my hands. How many hands did it go through before mine,
right.
And what stories am I going to add to this piece?
Sure.
And that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about some of the vintage and neo-vintage watches we have in our collection. So you mentioned your Explorer 2.
Right.
That was from
96 or 97. Okay. I can't remember off the top of my head. Yeah.
Tell me a little bit more about this Gallet.
Yeah. This was something that I picked up 6 or 7 years ago, and I was just starting to think about vintage, and I was in this phase where I was consuming so much watch content on YouTube, and I happened to see a YouTube video that had Fred Savage.
Big watch collector.
Yeah, big watch collector. Yeah. Which I didn't know at the time, and I thought that was really interesting because I kind of grew up watching the Wonder Years.
Hell yeah.
And Fred Savage is a fixture in my kind of childhood in that way. And I was watching this video, and he was going through some of the watches that were in his collection, and one of them was a Gallet Multichron. It was a brand that I had never heard of, and just looking at the dial that had, it was like silver dial with blue and red, and the indices were kind of loomed, but patina, and the same was true of the hands. I just thought it was super, super interesting. So from that, I tried to search out some examples. I did find one ultimately. A watch seller, he's got a relatively significant Instagram presence. His name's Justin. I'm going to mispronounce his last name probably, but Vrakis.
Oh.
And he was known at the time, and perhaps still is, as kind of the Gallet king. Our mutual friend Kyle actually pointed me to him as someone that might have a good example of it. So
shout out Kyle.
Shout out to Kyle. And I ended up reaching out to him on Instagram, just DM'd and asked him if he had one. We went back and forth, and ultimately, chose to purchase from him. In that case, I just chose to trust the seller in that respect. Just knowing that he was someone that was focused on Gallet and sold quite a bit of it. I just went into that transaction with a bit more trust. So picked it up. I've had it since. It's not something I wear often. I want to wear it more, as I said, I think in our last episode. So looking forward to breaking it out.
Again, I know nothing about the brand Gallet, so my homework after this episode is to go research it, because I'm again, you see these things in person, and I want to know so much more.
Yeah. And funnily enough, I was watching pretty recently another video, and this is maybe even a few weeks ago, but it was with Mike Nouveau. And he was talking about his collection of watches. And one of them, in fact, is an example of the Gallet Multichron from the 60s. It is very similar to mine. His is in probably a little bit better condition, at least the hands are. And I was like, yeah, I need to wear that watch more often. And actually, that was the thing that kind of spurred me to take a look at the watch again and break it out from the box.
Love that. I'm going to do a ton of research on Gallet, and who knows, maybe I'll have one on my wrist one day.
Hey.
Okay. Anything else in your collection that's vintage?
I mean, besides the Polar, and I guess it qualifies as neo vintage, the Cartier Solo,
yes, of course,
Tank Solo piano dial. I think those are probably the three that sort of qualify in that neo vintage range. But outside of that, no. But I'm always looking, I think, to expand on that. It's a part of my collection that I really want to dig a bit more into and going forward in the future.
You're not a big buy sell guy.
I'm not.
Yeah,
I'm not.
So I know that when you buy a watch, it's likely still in your collection the next time I ask you.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily true with me. So I can tell you about a ton of vintage watches that I've owned, but that may not still have. But I'll focus first on the ones I do have.
Yeah.
So this 1979 Datejust that I just recently bought, which I love.
Yeah.
And I just a second on engravings, like. Watch engraving used to be so much more of a thing.
Yeah.
I'm kind of annoyed that doesn't really, well, it exists for sure still. There's such a fascination with exhibition casebacks, and you kind of lose the ability to have something meaningful on the back.
Yeah.
Rolex, obviously, I mean, now in recent years, they have some exhibition casebacks, which is very interesting. But for years, for their history, like Rolex is the best watch to engrave on the back.
Yeah.
They have nothing on the case back.
Yeah.
It is built for an engraving, right? And and Rolex kind of represents like a special occasion, a special moment in your life. Like that's what they're known for, milestone watches. And so why not have a platform for an engraving? Yeah.
It's really interesting that you raise that. And customization more generally, right? And maybe that's a topic for a different day, but it's generally something that's like frowned upon with watches, at least, current time. Customization is a thing that in other areas of life, like cars, other luxury areas, totally fine. In fact, it's maybe encouraged or increases the value if you customize your car or, add things to improve its performance, that kind of thing. But with watches, not so much.
Totally. My understanding is that in the early days of the GMT, or let's say when they released the Coke bezel, Rolex service would allow you to swap out the bezel. Like, let's say you get a Pepsi and you wanted the Coke.
Yeah.
They just put the Coke in for you.
Yeah.
That's wild.
I know.
Can you imagine Rolex doing that today?
Yeah.
Be like, oh yeah, I have this Batman, but I really want it to be a Bruce Wayne. Yeah, sure, no problem.
Yeah. Never.
I mean, yeah, so maybe shame on them, right? Like that, like they made watches less fun.
Yeah.
That vintage watches are fun because people did cool stuff to their watches. I'll also I know I keep banging on about Rolex, and I said I wouldn't, but what bothers me about modern Daytonas is the polished center links. Same thing with GMTs.
Yeah. Yeah.
What the hell?
Yeah.
These are tool
Scratch
watches.
magnet.
These are tool watches.
Yeah.
If you look at vintage ones, the reason Tom Selleck looks like a badass wearing a Pepsi GMT and Magnum PI is because it's kind of rugged. That's his look. It's quote unquote manly. I don't know if I'm going to get canceled for saying that in 2025, but why does a GMT in particular and a Daytona, I'll throw that in, why do they need polished center links? Why do we need to have flash on a watch like that? That's not how we're talking about history. You mentioned going the beauty of vintage is when you discover something modern, the if you're interested enough, you'll go dig into the history. Well, the history of all these watches is functionality.
Yeah.
Right? Tool watch functions. They served a purpose. The professional line just call that, Rolex professional models are that because they are made for professionals. Sure. Not everyone's diving down to the depths of the the ocean, but at the same time, if that's what the sell is, that's kind of what you want the watch to represent.
Yeah. I mean, I think the challenge now is that they're not really tool watches anymore. If we're honest
Certainly
with each
not.
other, it's jewelry. You're dealing with something that's obviously meant to be a luxury piece. Who's taking it diving? I don't know anyone that's ever actually been diving with a Submariner. When was the last time you actually used a chronograph function on your watch to measure speed of a car?
Using the tachometer? Yeah, never. Or tachometer. How do you say it?
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. I don't, it's a good question. Tachymeter? Who knows?
I say tachymeter, but now I'm realizing saying it out loud. I don't know if that's right.
Yeah.
Funny you mentioned that though, because a quick aside, I was, where the hell was I? I was at a pool recently. Maybe it was Miami. I don't know. It was maybe Florida. Yeah. I was at a pool somewhere in the last 6 months, and I saw this dude wearing a modern, I don't know what the hell the nickname is these days. Cermet. Starbucks, whatever. I don't know, whatever. The modern Submariner with a green bezel.
Yeah.
And I watched this man walk from his pool chair to join his wife in the pool, and he walked down 3 steps to get into the pool. So he's half submerged, and he's immediately brings his wrist up above his head. And he goes, oh man, I got to take off my watch. And then scurries back to his chair and takes off his Rolex Submariner.
Oh man.
And then gets back in the pool. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, dude, what in the world are you doing? I get it that I know it's a lot of money these days. $10,000 for a watch is crazy by any standards. But it's built to be in
the water.
Certainly in a pool. I get it. If you're going down 600 meters or something, okay, fine, maybe not built for that.
Yeah, let's not test it. But in a pool, come on.
Yeah. Now, okay, I will say though, vintage watches do not go in the pool.
Yeah.
I don't care what year it's from. If you haven't gotten it properly tested, I would even say buy Rolex for water resistance and signed off. Don't mess with it.
Yeah.
Okay, let me tell you about some of the vintage watches I have. So I have the 1979 Datejust I just bought. Love the engraving. I have a few. So I used to own a 1969 Submariner 5513. I owned it for 3 weeks.
Impulse purchase.
I really loved it actually, and then I really hated it. And
what changed?
What changed is I wasn't ready for a vintage watch, and that means is I was still lusting after modern watches, and particularly modern Rolex at the time. And you have a lot of expectations when you buy a watch, and when you ultimately, I had never put it on my wrist, so this was something I bought on, if you know the auction site Loop This, run by Eric Koo.
Yeah,
great site. You should all check it out if you haven't. I got it in hand, And what they don't tell you about vintage watches is that they really don't feel like modern watches, and particularly the bracelet. Like every time I would walk with that watch on, it would like kind of jingle jangle, which to me now is a beautiful thing. Like as my evolved collector mind has shifted, like that's cool, and you kind of you expect that, you want that, that's the original bracelet.
Yeah.
To me, it was like I feel like it's cheap. Like I couldn't believe I paid, $13,000-$14,000, whatever I paid for it was. That was a good watch, but I got rid of it way too quickly. I owned, as I think I mentioned, I think that was on the last episode, that I owned a 1979 Day-Date yellow gold champagne dial classic, but with a Spanish date wheel. Problem with that is there was again, this is like when you don't know enough about vintage, you can get screwed. And this wasn't me necessarily getting screwed, but basically they Rolex outsourced the President bracelet manufacturer for a while, and part of one of the brands they used, or jewelers they used, was in Argentina. And I'm forgetting all the information around this now. I was very well versed in it when I got the watch, and it's all escaped me. But the bottom line is that there was no way to remove the links.
Wow.
And so you actually had to have, and I guess Rolex at the time would do this, they had to like cut the links and then like weld them back together.
Insane.
And so I had to go get a jeweler do that for me to size the watch. And then when I was kind of done with the watch and ready to sell it, it made it very hard to sell. Because people were like, this is a fake bracelet. And I was like, no, like read this article, So,
can you add the link back?
By welding it.
Yeah, but you can do it. Presumably you got the link that they took off.
Absolutely.
Or links that they took off, and you can actually put them back.
But what a pain.
Yeah.
Who wants to hear that? Who wants to buy a watch and be like, oh, by the way, you have to go to some random ass jeweler to weld this bracelet back together?
I think removing a screw is a pain now.
Right.
If you don't have the ability to sort of quick release like a link, I can't even imagine having to take it somewhere to have it like welded off and on. Yeah, it's brutal.
Totally. So, and then the other vintage watches I have in my collection, which I actually rarely wear, but maybe now that we're talking about it, I'll start wearing them again. I have a couple of Omega Constellations that my grandfather used to wear.
Nice.
These are passed down to me, which is awesome. And like, I look at them a lot,
Very classic.
Very
Clean.
classic. I got them fully serviced, just like they're working like a charm. So one from the 50s, one from the 60s. And then I have this badass watch from my dad, and I didn't even know he owned this. So my dad passed away when I was 14. I was very young. I did have a lot of time with him, through the years of 0 to 14, and we talked about a lot of things. Watches were not one of them, and he was a very modest guy, at least in externally. And so
did he wear a watch every day?
He did, but he wore a quartz watch. I have that watch, and now I'm forgetting the name of the brand. Skagen.
Oh yeah.
It was a very thin Skagen
Scandinavian
watch.
watch brand. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Again, very modest.
Yeah.
And he was a very successful man, but he was not into sort of material things.
But he did have a collection apparently outside of what he wore day to day. Okay.
Yes. So he had this. So two watches I got from him that are very cool, and both automatic, mechanical watches, I should say. One is a Universal Genève, which is a tiny little thing, integrated gold bracelet, and then a really badass like Studio 54 style all gold Gerard Perregaux watch that is also integrated, like sort of like I wish I knew the word to describe the bracelet, but again, I'll post a picture on the gram and we'll link to it. But super, super cool. Kind of like what people call geezer watches these days, which is like Mike Nouveau and whatever Phil Toledano have popularized. But I can't imagine him ever wearing it. But again, I got it fully serviced, and the guy who opened it up, he had never seen this watch, and he opened it and saw the movement and was like, this is gorgeous. Like, what is this watch? And I still haven't I don't know the reference number. I don't know anything about it. I rarely wear it. I've worn it like twice.
This is GP.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll pull it out after we're done recording here. But sick watch. Now I have so many questions. If I you know, in an alternate universe got like, you know, 10 more minutes with my dad, this would be one of the questions I would ask him.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
like what were you thinking when you bought this watch,
Yeah.
and when did you think you would wear this?
Yeah.
But so that's another beautiful thing about vintage watches is like if they are passed down,
Yeah.
you know, I've mentioned this on a way early pod we did, but someone once said to me, or maybe it wasn't directly to me, it was on a video or something, that, you know, when you're particularly talking about automatic watches, like your day-to-day movements are what powers that
Yeah.
watch. And when someone passes an automatic watch down to you, now you're taking on that responsibility of making that watch.
Yeah.
Like you're powering it with your movements at day to day.
Yeah.
And so like that's pretty poetic, and I love that
Yeah.
concept.
There's something really spiritual about that. That's kind of awesome. Yeah.
Totally. It's like you're very literally keeping something going of
Mhm.
theirs, you know, and that's a beautiful thing. So anyway, vintage watches, whether purchased or passed down, you know, have tons of meaning. I think we've you know, we're kind of beating a dead horse now with just like there's so much more meaning in vintage
Yeah.
than there is in modern, and it's worth exploring. But, and this is a beautiful segue, caveat, what the hell do we have to worry about?
Oh,
Tons.
tons. The problem with vintage, right, is you don't know exactly what you're getting. You don't oftentimes know where it came from. You don't know the service history. You don't know, you know, whether it's been polished, whether it has all the original parts. There's just a ton of danger when you don't have all the information. With anything that you purchase new from the AD, you know, it's coming right off the manufacturing line. You know, all the parts are authentic and real and new. Just not the case with vintage. And so there's so many questions, and you have to be extraordinarily careful or accept that, you know, there's going to be risk here, and you know, buyer beware.
Okay, so I think you've sufficiently scared everyone. Help us mitigate those risks. What do we do? As again, I'll just go back to one sort of disclaimer here that you and I are not claiming to be, nor do we think we are vintage experts by any sense of that word. So as us, as who we are, you know, we know a lot about watches, know very little about vintage watches. How do we protect ourselves from things you just mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, I think number one, you have to accept that there's going to be a certain amount of risk that you you know, just take,
Mhm.
right? There's never going to be a 100% guarantee. You know, you see and you read a lot of instances where even auction houses that have all the expertise in the world sell watches that ultimately they find out at some point in the future were in fact, you know, counterfeit, or some part of them were counterfeit.
Facts.
Um,
And by the way, I'm going to clarify something
Yeah.
real quickly. Counterfeit is an interesting word to use because sometimes it's just straight up counterfeit. But
Yeah.
like in the auction house perspective, like rarely is it truly just like some Joe Schmo in their backyard or basement, you know, making some fake part. But like what tends to happen is that if you sell it as all original, but there has been a service part that's added,
Right.
even if it's by the brand,
Yeah.
that will affect the value in a big
Absolutely.
way.
Absolutely.
And so like that, let's just like, I wanted to clarify
Yeah.
counterfeit
Yeah,
could
you're
mean just
100%
Franken.
right.
Yeah.
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 But I think the best thing you can do, which I mentioned earlier about my Gallet, is you buy the seller. You'll hear that often.
Mhm.
You want to try to buy from a reputable source. You know, someone that has the expertise, that can look at a watch and at least, you know, get past the threshold of knowing that this is, you know, authentic, that it looks right. They can open up the watch and identify any obvious problems or flaws. And so you've got to be able to trust the seller, and I think probably the main thing here is just to, you know who you're buying from, and buy from trusted sources.
Yeah. And we'll actually end in a bit on talking about where we buy vintage watches. But before we get to that, another thing I want to bring up is like know your full cost. And when I say full cost,
Yeah.
I don't mean just like you negotiating with someone and like the final price you pay. There is likely going to be service costs associated with it. And like we mentioned at the beginning of this episode, like know that chronographs are more expensive to
Mhm.
service and really service. Of course, if you start getting into calendar watches and perpetual calendars
Oh,
in
yeah.
particular, old perpetual calendar watches are like, you're already going to pay a pretty penny for them, just the price you pay, but then the servicing costs are intense.
Because you need to find someone that's capable of servicing it. And secondarily, with a vintage watch, they're just, to the point you made earlier, more fragile. Yeah. So it just takes a different level of care and expertise when you're servicing a watch. And so that's going to increase your cost.
You know, I was watching this collectability podcast, which they do audio only, and they also are on YouTube. And John Reardon was interviewing Mike Nouveau. And you actually mentioned on the last episode that you bought your Cartier piano dial tank from eBay.
Right.
John Reardon, who runs Collectability, which is they sell vintage Patek watches. Talk about buy the seller. I trust that man when it comes to Patek more than anyone in the world. Potentially even more than Thierry Stern, the CEO of Patek. He was saying that he has yet to sell stuff on eBay via his Collectability brand. Which is weird to me because a lot of dealers sell on eBay because it's a funnel for exactly right for it's customer acquisition, and usually you don't hear a seller saying they refuse to sell on eBay. It's usually the buyer that's like, oh shit, I don't want to buy something on eBay because I don't know, I trust the person. But his point was the authenticity guarantee. He's like, they farm it out to a third party.
They do,
and he goes, if I'm selling a 3970 perpetual calendar chronograph, I don't want some random dude just opening that up. There's 3 people in the world I trust to open that watch up.
Yeah.
Which was, I never thought of that.
I don't actually know that they open it up though. To be fair, the one purchase that I did make from eBay, you will get a timeline of like when it gets to the third party authenticator and when it ships out from the third party authenticator. We're talking about like hours.
Sure.
And knowing how much volume is probably going through there, I'm not totally certain that they're opening up watches. But I get the point, understand where he's coming from.
To be fair, so I thought about that when you mentioned it on the last episode. I was thinking that may be true, particularly because you bought a quartz watch, though. So maybe they're not opening up a quartz watch. But if you're buying a $70,000 watch, I would hope that or maybe not.
It's a good question. I mean, I've watched a few YouTube videos about the eBay authentication, and I hear similar things about the time frame that the watch is turned around from the authenticator.
Oh, really?
It being, again, an hour or two. I don't know if that's true straight across the board or if they treat it differently depending on the cost or the model of the watch, but unclear to me what exactly they're doing there, and that's actually a similar refrain from people that are doing reviews of eBay authentication as well.
Interesting. Okay, yeah. So there you go. Right, like there's hair everywhere. Yeah. Right. And I think the one thing you can do is definitely, as you said, buy the seller. But if you're buying the seller, then hopefully that seller is also a human being that understands the risk and therefore will talk you through it.
Yeah.
Allow you to see the watch. If you're willing to go to them, like they should be willing to let you sit with the watch for an hour and just like inspect it and hear more about it from their mouth. Like that's how you get people comfortable.
Yeah.
And so with that, like who are these people that you trust?
Yeah, it's a great question. Adam Golden, Menta Watches,
absolutely.
Who, we talk about Roman from time to time at Luxury Bazaar. He's someone that often will lean on Adam on vintage. So he's someone that I've come to trust. I've definitely had some correspondence with him back and forth on Instagram, and he's someone that replies to messages pretty frequently and thoroughly. And so I haven't purchased anything from him, but he'd be someone that I would trust.
Agreed.
When it comes to something like Cartier, I mean, we've mentioned Mike Nouveau several times, but it's very clear that he knows what's going on there, and again, just in terms of knowledge and expertise, he's probably someone that I would trust, particularly with Cartier.
He started as a DJ.
I knew that. I've heard him in a couple interviews and just talk about his transition from being a DJ to a watch dealer. Just I guess the DJ gigs weren't quite doing enough for him financially. So that's kind of interesting. I'm trying to think who else. Anyone pop into mind for you?
Sure. Gray and Patina.
Oh yeah, of course.
where
Duh.
you actually introduced
Yeah,
me to them
yeah,
many
yeah.
years ago. I brought
Shout
it up
out
on
Curtis.
shout out Curtis on the last episode. I mentioned that you had brought them up, and that's where I bought the Datejust with the Onyx dial. Dude, they were so good to
Yeah,
work with.
yeah.
Like they're just really good people over there, and I know they actually get a little slack. I don't know if you've heard some of the comments about them that like
haven't.
Reddit threads about Grand Patina. I don't know. There's like they're owned by it's owned by like 3 people.
Yeah.
And I guess they're like well-to-do people who like travel a lot. And so people weirdly give them shit for like
Really?
just like being in like nice places in
I
the
think
world.
Curtis
and,
lives
like,
in Napa, but yeah.
yeah. So God bless. Dude,
Yeah,
you did well in
amazing.
life. Like go
I'd
enjoy
live
your
in Napa
life.
too.
Yeah. Yeah. Enjoy your life. But they're great. I got a shout out of a buddy of mine named Wes Wynn. Actually, also comes from the music industry.
Hey.
Was at like I think Sony and Meta for a while. He was always into watches and always ran this like kind of as a side gig, this website called Collectors Corner New York.
Okay.
And I think maybe in the last 3 years went full time. Super nice guy, super knowledgeable, always willing to chat. He sells on Pushers as well. So you can buy directly from his website, Collectors Corner, or you can go to Pushers. And so I want to talk about Pushers for a second, which Mike Nouveau is one of the founding dealers of.
Pushers.io.
Pushers.io. They have an app. They have a website. I haven't bought anything from them.
I haven't either.
I think they have about 70 vintage dealers. They are very selective about which dealers they choose. They don't facilitate any of the transactions, which I found interesting.
Right. Yeah. It's
So-
a different model.
Right? It's basically the dealers are paying a subscription fee to list on Pushers. They really take their time to like vet people and they basically it's who Mike knows and the other partners
Right.
know. I think that's a good model, and it's basically just a way to find good vintage watches that are out there that then you ultimately connect with the main dealer and you facilitate the payment however they accept payment, whether it's wire or credit card, whatever it is. I would also put in Wind Vintage. I cannot believe we haven't
of
brought up
course,
Eric
Eric
Wind.
Wind.
Yeah. Yeah. Like Eric Wind is the nerd of all nerds. And I say that with the most affection possible.
Yeah.
Like he lives, breathes, and puts people to sleep with vintage. Brilliant mind when it comes to vintage watches. You've definitely seen him before on Hodinkee videos. I think he's done like 4 of the reference points videos, which by the way,
Right.
if you guys haven't watched,
So thorough.
so thorough. It's Gene brought up earlier in this episode, like, you know, being interested in a modern version of a watch and wanting to dive deep into the history. What reference points is on Hodinkee is essentially a deep dive into the beginning, the first reference of whatever watch it is. So they do like reference points for Submariner, for GMT, for a Daytona, for I think the Omega Seamaster. And they basically take you through all the iterations of that watch. And what's kind of cool, and only someone like Hodinkee could do this, is they tend to have, 90% of those iterations on the table while they're talking about it. And they show you, which is super
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so Eric Wind is like the sort of guru of vintage watches. And he's super trustworthy. And I would definitely buy whatever he's selling. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The last one I'll mention, and I can't think of any more, but the last one I'll mention is Keystone watches.
Oh, I'm not familiar.
Really?
Yeah.
Keystone watches.
Tell me more.
Based in LA, started by Eric Koo as well.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay. I mean, I'm familiar with Eric, obviously, but yeah. Okay.
And I think there's a couple more partners in it. It's like appointment only. It's actually pretty cool. Like they're super nice, and you go in and you can email them like what watches. You can look on Keystone, I guess .com. Maybe Keystone Watches. Just Google Keystone Watches, you'll find it. And if you are in LA, you can go and make an appointment, and they will basically bring you. They'll have the watches waiting for you that you reference in your email. But what I love is that there's no weirdness about like, hey, so I saw you had a Paul Newman Daytona on the website. Like, I am not buying that today, but I would love to put that on my wrist. I'm like, yeah, sure, no problem. And that's
Amazing. Yeah.
that's the best kind of experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because, I think even they know that at some point in the future, you might be in the market for a Paul Newman date.
That's right.
And they're there for you.
That's right. So those are the vintage dealers that I think we covered all of them. I'll plug Theo and Harris for a second
Yeah.
because I think, Christian's super knowledgeable. I know he's somewhat divisive maybe, but that's kind of the personality there. But he's been in the game for a long time, since he was like a 17-year-old kid.
By the way, Christian's got this really amazing. I don't know if it's a Datejust or a Day-Date, but it's like purple, like it's patinaed purple.
Yes.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yes. That is an
That
awesome
watch is beautiful.
Yes. Yes. And that's his bread and butter is vintage and kind of weird and off the beaten path. Especially, and I'll give him credit because when he started talking about that stuff, it wasn't cool to talk about that stuff. Now, again, what we mentioned, Mike Nouveau and stuff, like that's all people want to talk about is the weird and wonderful. So yeah, Theo and Harris is great. They have a limited selection, I would say. Like of the dealers we mentioned, they probably have like hundreds of listings. Theo and Harris, much like Collector's Corner, the one I mentioned with Wes Wynn, probably 10 to 15 watches at a time that they have on their site. But again, very trustworthy, very willing to talk, and answer a ton of questions. So I think we've covered vintage watches to the best of our ability. Guys and gals, I think we have 2 female listeners based on the data. Please tell us, 1, what you thought of this episode. 2, are you buying vintage? Why are you buying vintage? I love seeing that stuff. I know you love seeing that stuff. So we're here for all the unsolicited wrist shots, and now we're soliciting them. Please keep them to wrist shots, just to be clear. But no, really, like that. This is why we're doing this. Like we're clearly not monetizing any of this stuff. So we do it because we love watches and we actually just love the community. So send us what you're wearing. Send us your thoughts, good or bad, and we'll keep coming at you with some hot takes, some advice, and hopefully a few laughs here and there.
Until next time.